Just in January this year, there was another poll done by Pulse Consultants, who again asked everyone, so what are the top problems facing our country? And the answers were inflation, unemployment, corruption. And what you see is these are the narratives coming out of our main political discourse as well, right? But the fact that we can't link something like inflation to climate change, the fact that we aren't saying, actually the fact that we are basically living in one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, which literally means that we're going to struggle to have food and water in another 5 to 10 years. It's already happening, but everyone is going to feel it in in a decade or so. That's missing.
I mean, I want to talk about that too, but we talk about awareness, and the Pakistani attitude is, देखी जाएगी ना, अभी तो सही है, देखी जाएगी. But ये जो देखी जाएगी वाली attitude है, I feel like if that, the argument that I'm trying to put forth is that therefore it needs to come from a federal government policy level and down into the population. Because the population is in a place where they're worried about inflation and the price of ration and so on and so forth. So then the responsibility then lies on the government?
Well, I will play devil's advocate there. 2 decades of following politics tells me the government is not going to pick up a difficult issue. They're not going to pick up something where they need to educate the populace, explain to them why they need more taxpayer money, why they need to make things more expensive, why they need to increase oil prices, why all of us need to be happy to live in a world where we don't have electricity for several hours of the day because we've switched to renewable energy sources which are intermittent, right? These are all difficult changes, and no government is going to bring those about. You don't win an election by saying that we're going to save the planet and I'm going to stop oil and you can't use your car and please go buy a bicycle and good luck to you, right? But I believe it has to come the other way. We need citizens concerned, pushing and asking for those changes. It has to be bottom up. And I think that's why the role of the media, the role of Greena, the role of Climate Mahal is really important, because we need people to understand that this is their lives, their livelihoods, their children's future. And we need to be asking for more, and we need to ask for it in a way that emboldens politicians to make the big changes that they need to make. Okay, so if
it has to come bottom up, then my next question, who's listening to me? Number one. Number two, then it's funny, I just want to blame somebody today. So but the corporations, they need to step in and go, listen, we can hear you, speak, we can hear you loud and clear. As a corporate entity, maybe we have the means to make some of this happen.
So all our corporations, especially sort of large international, multinational corporations, are the ones that are catering to a more aware urban middle-class youth, are doing a little bit of sustainability work, right? So the good intention is there, but I think it's increasingly becoming more of a marketing effort. They realize that something is needed, but no one is willing to sort of bring up that elephant in the room, which is that the basic function of corporates in many cases is to have an environmental impact, to deliver and produce goods that we may or may not actually need. Right? And I think that if they ask too many questions or they push far enough, most corporates would probably end up in an existential crisis in sort of really thinking about, is our supply chain sustainable? Do our consumers really need the goods that we're trying to sell them, or could they make do with something that's more basic and more friendly to the environment? And I think when you start asking those really difficult questions, that's when boardrooms shut down. So even those sustainability efforts are just to the extent that is feasible within their market strategies or investment strategies or whatever it is, and that's not enough is the problem.
But the jargon that we use, we touched at the beginning, life support, and the time is now, so we need to change that, don't we?
We do, and I think there are some interesting efforts underway to tell this climate story differently. So I don't know if you saw that Leonardo DiCaprio film Don't Look Up.
Oh yeah.
In which an asteroid is coming to hit planet Earth.
Oh yeah, I saw it.
No one believes it, even though they can see it in the sky and it's coming to hit. And that's essentially a metaphor for climate change, right? That's DiCaprio, who's a big environmental activist in his own right, trying to use the might of Hollywood to have, to tell this global story that you cannot ignore this any longer. It's literally an asteroid coming to hit planet Earth, obliterate all of us. And what has followed from that film is essentially this long debate about, is that really the metaphor? And DiCaprio keeps coming out and saying, I'm talking about climate change. This film was to try and make you understand. And if this doesn't do it, I don't know what will. And you see people like novelists like Amitav Ghosh, who is one of my favorite writers in the world, who is trying to tell the story through these beautiful 500-page novels that essentially involve the personal experience of climate change. It's in the back of every story he tells, and it'll be the story of people who are displaced because their communities are no longer livable because of flooding or drought or something like that. He'll tell stories about the sort of long tail of colonialism and how it's changed the way our societies work in a way that all we do is extract from the earth and not give enough back. And so people are trying to find different ways to tell the story. The problem is that we're still not doing it in a way that resonates with what in Pakistan we always refer to as the awam. And I think one of the problems is that it's not a good news story at the moment. So I do think one of the tricks that we're missing is being able to, in a sensible and proportionate way, sort of talk about the apocalypse that's here or impending, but to also say that there are ways out. And I think you're starting to see that shift towards, look, there is mitigation options. There are technologies out there that we need to develop that could help us along this journey. I think for too long that has been set up as it hasn't been specific enough. So you'll sort of have this, it's more like aspirational, or it's like a dream that, look, don't worry about fossil fuel emissions, because in 2035 some genius is going to develop some, mass scale carbon capture technology and we'll all be saved overnight. It'll be fine. It'll be like the iPod of, the next 2 decades. And that's a fantasy. But what you're starting to see is sort of more and more news reporting and academic work around things that exist today that are starting to take a few steps towards that kind of fantasy world. So there is carbon capture technology. It's big, it's clunky, it's too slow, but yes, it exists. And I think the story that we need to tell is one that has this level of hope in it. That, look, this will get better. We will probably find some way to make planet Earth livable, if not ideal for most of its species, including humans, hopefully. But we are not moving fast enough. We are not prioritizing this enough. And the only way to tell a good news story is if everyone makes this the top of their news agenda and the top of the way that they think about how they live their lives.